I'm working on a new project that my teammate has shared with me in GitHub, and now I have it open in VS Code. This application uses Azure OpenAI, so I need to find out what Azure OpenAI resources I have access to. I can use GitHub Copilot for Azure to help me with this question. I can ask at Azure, what Azure OpenAI resources do I have deployed? And quickly see information about my existing resources and what regions they are located in.
GitHub is much more than the place where you can store code. Meet Mona, a developer who's just been assigned a new project. Mona uses GitHub projects to manage her tasks and track iterations of work. GitHub's customizable views, filters, and layouts make it easy for teams to work their way. Mona quickly sets up an on-demand development environment using GitHub Codespaces. She dives into coding with GitHub Copilot, making her code more readable and efficient. She then sets up automated testing with GitHub Actions. Meanwhile, Mona's colleague had set up repository rules to enforce DevOps governance practices across their GitHub organization. Mona avoids leaking secrets by using GitHub Advanced Security secret scanning push protection, and also identifies potential security vulnerabilities using code scanning. In this short video, we've seen how GitHub can streamline your experience throughout the development lifecycle.
Hello, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are watching this Open Source Friday. You made it to Friday. Welcome to Open Source Friday, a GitHub production, but it's really made by you, the community of open source builders, contributors, maintainers, and like our guest today, companies who are actually actively supporting the open source ecosystem. Andrea Griffiths, a la Colombia Dev in all places. And I am so happy to be here today. I'm coming to you from the future or the past. No, the past, the future. We're actually in a pre-recording stage. Yours truly needed to be away today, but we did not want to miss an opportunity to bring you a great company. And we have an awesome folks that's going to be talking us through what this company does, their demo, etc. So if you found this transmission via our meetup group, you already know we have a space that is full of open source goodness, and we're here to support not only the maintainers and builders, but again, the companies. And if you just stumble upon this transmission, then welcome to the Open Source Friday family, and thank you for being here today. So let's get to business. First of all, today we're going to talk to Austin from Embrace. I would love for all of you to join their Slack, and I'm going to be sharing their Slack here shortly, so that while you are watching this transmission, if you have questions about anything that you see, you're able to actually ask those questions. Turns out they have a pretty awesome and active community there, so they'll be happy to answer those questions. And then I'll also share Austin's details later. Their company is called Embrace, and they are at the forefront of mobile app observability. That technology they're working on and what Austin is going to show us, it actually gives us some deep instrumentation and insights for all of you instrumentation and insight geeks. This technology provides insights for all of you developers to help you resolve critical issues that affect mobile apps. So our guest is going to show us today how Embrace is really transforming the way that teams understand and optimize their mobile applications. And our guest today is Austin Emmons. Austin is a lead iOS engineer at Embrace and brings over a decade of engineering expertise to the table. He's got over 10 years in iOS development, 5 years in Android, and 4 years working with Ruby. Since he joined Embrace in 2022, Austin has become an integral part of their iOS team. His background includes roles at Root Insurance, Model Labs, and showcases his diverse experience in the tech industry. For the past 5 years, Austin has specialized in collecting high-frequency telemetry on both Android and iOS platforms. So all that to say that he is beyond qualified to discuss mobile app observability and performance optimization. Thank you, Austin, for being here today with your wealth of knowledge. Welcome to Open Source Friday. How are you?
I'm good. How are you? Thanks for having me, Andrea.
Thank you for being here. Where are you joining from now, Austin? Where are you located?
I'm based in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, and have been for the last year or so. Before that, I was in Chicago.
Nice. Perfect. And obviously, you've been on Embrace now. Let's see, it's been 2022. right? No. Did I get that
Yeah.
wrong?
My time math is awful,
I
which is
know.
surprising for an observability engineer, but just 2.5 years, just over.
Perfect. Excellent. All right. So I gave a little bit of a description as to what Embrace the company was and failed to highlight them. One of the most important reasons, and it's the fact that you have fully open source all these mobile software development kits, including the available SDKs for Apple, Android, React Native, Flutter, and Unity. So that is really cool. And I'm guessing that's what you're going to tell us. So I want to know a little bit more about what exactly is Embrace.
Yeah, so we are an observability company focused mostly in the mobile space. And so I am an iOS developer and I focus mostly on Apple platforms. And then we have an Android team focused on Android platforms. And then those React Native and Unity SDKs are built on top of those underlying native SDKs. But Embrace is working on making sure that we can monitor app performance out in the wild for these mobile devices. And that's something that is a really tough problem, and we're really excited to tackle it. And as you said, we open sourced everything in the last year, which is awesome. It's a new frontier for the company to change our mindset and take on open source. But as part of doing that, we also took on the open specification for observability, and that is OpenTelemetry. And so our data model changed to be this open data model, which is amazing because it allows us to think out in the open and freely and share ideas and learn from some of the other members of the community, which is incredibly valuable.
That's awesome. For those of us who might be new to the world of telemetry, can you explain a little bit of the concept of what is OpenTelemetry? What does that mean?
Sure. There are three main pillars of OpenTelemetry: it's tracing, logging, and metrics. And tracing is really observing something, the duration of something, and it boils down to the main primitive is a span object. So that just is a span of time. And when you use it, you call start and you call end, and then it measures how long something took. And that's really important if you have an operation. And then logging is the standard logging. It's a little more complex than just log messages. And the spec is a little more free form and flexible than you might expect. But it's a really good opportunity to innovate in that space. And especially on mobile apps, we're using logs for things that haven't been thought of as logs, which is exciting. And then metrics are your standard counters. This is very well established in the back end. You have first time to paint or just mean response time for a server to get the response out. In the mobile space, this is new and different, and it's tough to find an actual anchor to figure out what a metric holds on to. So we're exploring what metrics can look like in the mobile space, and that's very exciting. So that's OpenTelemetry in the nutshell. Definitely check out OpenTelemetry.io if you haven't heard of it.
I think they're part of the Cloud Native Foundation, right? Like
Correct,
there is a Slack channel. We can share it as well. But folks, it's OpenTelemetry.io. So if you're interested in this, if you want to geek out about telemetry, this is the place. Now, what makes OpenTelemetry different when in the context of mobile?
Yeah, so OpenTelemetry is pretty well established in the server ecosystem or the microservice ecosystem even, and distributed tracing is a major highlight there. It's had some evolution, 5 to 10 years, I would say. It's really become OpenTelemetry and joined CNCF. In the mobile space, it's observability. It's just there's a lot more chaos that goes on. There's a lot less that you as an app developer controls. The app is running on a device. The application could have different network conditions, different devices in both iOS and Android. Right now, you have anything from a watch to a desktop to now a VR headset. And it's a whole gamut of where this application is running and what it's doing. Most of these devices are on battery power. This is not a box that is in a server on a shelf that you maintain and you're paying for that upkeep. And then people throw their phones when they get angry and they just toss them. So it is pure chaos out there. And what makes it really tough is if the app is slow or if there's any degradation in performance, that user really doesn't blame their low battery or their bad network condition. They blame you, the app developer. And so it really drives home the importance of observing your app out in the wild in these conditions to make sure, okay, the network conditions are bad and my network requests are going out in an order that I didn't expect. What can I do to make sure to make this experience a little more consistent, if not more performant?
That's such an interesting point. So as a developer, if I have an application and I've collected all this data, like every time that, I don't know, my whatever X app crashes on my phone and it says send report, right? Developers are collecting this data using OpenTelemetry, and like, what are their options then? Like, where are they sending all this data that's being collected?
Yeah, and so that's where we come in. But so you can send the data to us, and out of the box, the data will come to Embrace. We have a dashboard that lets you observe the performance of the application. But now with our move to OpenTelemetry, we can do more. And what we found is a lot of teams already have OpenTelemetry set up, and they have these collectors set up for their backends. And why not have the data come and live side by side with their server data and start seeing the insights and the correlation between what's happening on the back end, and then when a request fails or when the bad state is sent from the device, how that goes out and affects there. And so you can export directly to any OTLP collector straight from the device, it's really interesting to see that data just go straight out of there. And that's what we're going to get into today. So
can you talk us a little bit through, we always talk about this, how was that path to open sourcing this? I'd love to hear a little bit of how that began, and then we can get to seeing demos and show us how it actually worked. That'd be great.
It was a process for sure. The biggest thing was the change in mindset, because a lot of the abstractions that we made to either simplify the interface or just hide certain things that somebody that was integrating with our product just didn't need to know, a lot of that becomes a moot point if they're looking at the source and they see exactly how things work. And if they want to, just fork it, change it, and go about your merry day. And so just changing that development mindset of why can't we let somebody do this, and becoming more just of a tool that people use instead of a product that people use, was a shift in the mindset. And then there's challenges with the endeavor itself. The biggest is always the deadline. And so the team had to meet weekly and have a decision list about, here's what needs to get done this week. Here are the decisions that we absolutely can make. And you have those meetings, and the focus of those meetings is actually making a decision and moving forward. It's not, oh, we can't think about this, let's kick it till next week. It's no, we're getting this done and crossing it off the list. And just the quick pace that we had to do it was the biggest challenge. And then the second biggest challenge is we're putting together technologies that we haven't really played with and used before. We've heard of them. We know that they're great and they have proven their worth in different applications, but we're pulling them into an application that it's new territory. And so we have to read the documentation, do our due diligence to make sure that we understand how this dependency is going to work. And then we have to play with it in practice and say, okay, validate that the documentation is correct, make sure that it scales with where we want it to scale, and then integrate it back into the product. And just that prototyping and that integration is a big challenge, just because it's very tedious work of, okay, test, verify. But it's what we do, that's development.
I love it that's now open source. So now it's not just your team, right? Like we can open it up to an entire ecosystem to help out. Okay, I want to see this in action. Can you show us, what are you going to show us today?
Sure.
Maybe take us for a tour of the repo and stuff like that. And let's drop some stars, folks. We're really good at that here, Open Source Friday. We leave some stars for our guests.
Yes, please. Share screen. Entire screen one. Okay, so here is the repo. And so we're at Embrace.io, Embrace Apple SDK. That's the SDK for Apple platforms. We also have Embrace Android SDK. Check out Embrace.io, the organization, as well, to see what we've open sourced. This is the Apple SDK, pretty standard Swift package. Sources and tests are the main two directories. We have a package.swift. There's contribution guide if you want to contribute. Definitely take a look at issues and pull requests. We have an issue open that I'm hoping to fix this week. It should be done but by the time this airs, which would be amazing. That's always setting deadlines on yourself. And then the README down below. Hopefully this README, please give feedback if there's anything here. The team really prides itself on having something that's approachable. And so there's a getting started doc that goes into things a little deeper, but even if you don't want to click that link, you can just skim quickly on how to set up the SDK and how to get started. And it kind of explains some of the interface choices that we've made. And so come in, check us out, give us a star. We'd really appreciate it. Past the README and the getting started doc, there's this docs.embrace.io that'll bring you over to our docs page, which is also a great area for content to read up on how you interact with this platform. If you have questions about just OpenTelemetry in general, you can come in and ask, and that's a good spot to do it. But yeah, this is definitely the jumping off point.
Is your documentation open source as well? Are you able to contribute to that?
Ooh, I don't think it is currently, but we've talked about it. And so I think that is coming, and it's just a matter of pushing the right buttons and getting the tasks out there. But yes, that's great feedback right there. There
you go, folks. So take a look at the repo. It's embrace-io. Leave a star before you do anything else, and then you can go ahead and take a look at the issues that are open and give feedback. The documentation can walk you through the getting started process. So very cool way for you all to participate. So we've seen what's in the repo now. Is there anything else you'd like to show us here?
No, we can move into Xcode and check out the project as well.
Yes, let's do it. All right. Let me take out this screen, and then we're going to share the other. Now here we are. And maybe if you can give us a tad bit of a zoom in, that'd be great. Just a little.
Zoom in.
Mm-hmm. Perfect.
Cool.
All right. So what am I looking at?
Cool. So this is what I've done is I've opened up in the examples directory, we have a BrandGame Xcode project. And so I've opened that up top. But down below, right now, I'm inside the Embrace.io local package dependency. So the BrandGame app is set up basically to point to the same repo that it lives in so that we can test things and I can edit the source code of the SDK and then run and build the example app directly to device or to the simulator to see changes in the SDK. If you haven't done this already, before we had two different repos where our test project lived in one and the SDK lived in another, and it got very cumbersome to try to keep those in sync and do some of this local development. So this was one of the biggest pluses when it came to moving into a Swift package is Apple has really modernized their development stack with Swift. And so I really like this. But right now we're looking at the package.swift. So just wanted to give you an overview of the products that this package exports. Embrace.io is just the convenience initialization target. It is there to get you set up as quickly as possible. And it's what we recommend that you would import. Just import Embrace.io. You have hopefully everything you need to get started. Embrace Core is the meat that lives underneath that. And if you want, you can import Embrace Core as well. This gives you the opportunity to really customize the SDK, and you can inject in custom instrumentation that you've built or really manage how the SDK should start. So that once you have some familiarity with the project, that's where you might want to start looking. And then down below, we have Embrace Crash, which is our crash reporter. This is using a very popular open source iOS crash reporter called KS Crash. And so KS Crash is a great dependency. We maintain our own fork of KS Crash and we point to that. And then this Embrace Crash target just pulls that in. And the biggest thing we've done to separate this as a different library here is mostly to keep, if you don't want to use crash reporting, then you can keep the size of this dependency down by just installing Embrace Core itself. Embrace.io pulls this in automatically, but that's one of the more advanced customizations that you can get into if you pull in Embrace Core directly. And then we have support for a Google product, Embrace Crashlytics. This is a library that basically sniffs out Crashlytics crash reports and then sends them to Crashlytics, but then also captures them and sends them through our crash reporting system as well, just so that we find that a lot of users are coming from Crashlytics. It's a de facto crash reporter for both Android and iOS. And so this is helpful to let them test the waters for both. But yeah, that's the package dependencies, KS Crash. OpenTelemetry-Swift is the Swift implementation for OpenTelemetry. And then the next big one is GRDB, which is a wrapper around SQLite, and it's how we store things locally on disk. These are three big iOS open source projects that I couldn't not shout out. Like,
let's do it.
We stand on the shoulders of giants, and so can't give thanks enough to these open source developers. But yeah, let's get into it. Initializing Embrace and how you do it and how it's done. We recommend you start off. I should give you an overview of just this BrandGame app itself. It's a SwiftUI app. So SwiftUI is relatively new in the Apple ecosystem. I'll just give you an overview of what the app does. It's a simple like kitchen sink app, but we like to have a little more fun than just your normal kitchen sink app. And so this will pop in. The simulator will have to load. So here's the Embrace logo. I think Mbot is the nickname because it's the little robot.
That's your that.
There's our company logo, and the app has a couple of mini games in it that I'll get to. The first one I just call Bubble, and it just lets you tap anywhere on the logo, and a random color will get drawn in these little bubbles. Really simple, stupid stuff that you can put together very quickly. For us, we have some automatic instrumentation that captures taps on the screen and their location. And so it's just a fun way to do that. There's a secret to this app, and that's the main menu is hidden at first. And so you have to triple tap the background on any of screen to bring up the hidden menu. That's totally against Apple's developer guidelines. You should not do that. That's terrible UI. This is actually like the main menu for the app. It'll grow as we add new features, or if we just want to have a little more fun and add some more mini games, this will grow. But the first line item lets you add just user information, and we add this as metadata to all of the telemetry that we collect. Username, identifier, and email are the three that we call out. And I'll note that this doesn't perform any validation for email. We don't recommend that you pass email identifiers in or any PII, but it's more for us. You can hash that and pass us just an opaque value. But we can change to some other mini games. So Reflex is another one. This is a simple mini game where you hold down one piece of the logo. You have to wait anywhere between up to, I think, 7 seconds. And then a different piece calls out, and then it times you how quickly you can tap that other piece. And right there, we're just measuring that time it takes for you to react. This, I think, was inspired by WarioWare, an old GameCube game. It's just something simple, but for us, we're an observability platform, and I already discussed tracing and spans and measuring duration. And so that's exactly what we're trying to exercise here is we're measuring the duration of how far we can go. And if you mess up, oh no, it tells you it's the wrong one. That span now ended in a bad state. So triple tap again to bring up the hidden menu. And the final one is Simon. Simon says to do things, and you have to follow Simon. This is a classic game. And so an item will light up, and then we go through round by round, and it's just a memory test to see how far you can go. My high score ends at 9, and I think I missed that one. And eventually you distract yourself or something and it breaks. You finish the game, and then you can start over. This is just, okay, let's make 5 requests to example.com/test and submit that. And then we'll gather those round trip times to say exactly how quickly that performance was. There's a little stepper here that we can, get obnoxious with and send 50 requests to see how quickly those come back. And it just gives some quick information on the performance of those requests. But those are actual network requests that we sent out. And so our instrumentation is also capturing those and logging those into OpenTelemetry, which is useful for us to test what happens when certain things go wrong. Logging, we can do some OTel logs. So info, warn, error. The spec declares many different severities, and it's a numeric scale from 1 to 25 or 26, if I remember correctly. We just picked checkpoints for info, warn, and error, and then you can add custom attributes if you'd like. And
very cool.
For us, crash examples, it's a good way to test out that our crash reporter is working. This is the last little one, and then I won't submit this because it will crash the app as it intends, but that's good for us to make sure that our crash reporter is still operating. So yeah. That's an overview of the app. It's what goes into the app that's more useful. And so back into Xcode, the most important thing to do is actually declare your dependencies. And so in Xcode, in the project settings, you can go to package dependencies. And here, this one is not named with dot. It's a relative package, but that's how we pull in Embrace.io. If you were to add this for yourself, you'd come in here and then you can add in the Embrace Apple SDK. But if you have your app that you want to integrate with, this is how you, since we already are integrated, I'll stop there. That'll pull in the dependencies and Xcode will churn for a little bit as it downloads some things. But once everything is settled, you will just import Embrace.io and that pulls this convenience target in. And then for a Swift UI app, one of the easiest entry points into the app that we have is actually the initializer of this struct. And so I'm just using git actually to show my change, but we're going to override that initializer and call Embrace and start the setup process. And we've broken our setup process into two parts. The main method is this .setup method. And then there's a start method that you'll call afterwards. And I'll explain why in a second. But the biggest thing to include is this Embrace options variable. And that's where you add some customization into your SDK. That's how you connect your app and you identify yourself. Something that we found very useful is a lot of people like to separate their debug app from their release configuration. And so just like having staging versus production if you're developing a server application, it's useful to separate the data that you collect while testing from the data that your users will actually collect themselves out in the wild. And so we're using this preprocessor macro if debug else to separate our debug environment versus our release environment. I declare an app ID. This is just to identify this application in the Embrace backend. The platform, I'm just going to leave default and the SDK will figure it out. I override in the debug environment. We have the opportunity for us to test out into our staging backend. And so we can pull those URLs and those endpoints from the info P list, which is the way to inject configuration into the runtime of your app, override the log level. And then the final thing here is this OTel export. This export parameter comes in is this OTel export object. And that's defined down below as this OpenTelemetry export. And this is what I mentioned before is if you don't give this to us, the data will just go to the Embrace dashboard and you can use the Embrace dashboard just straight up. But if you want, you can customize this data to shift it to go to other places. And so here we have this OpenTelemetry export objects, and there are two main parameters, the span exporter and a log exporter that we support currently. And then the parameter there is actually these objects that come from the OpenTelemetry SDK itself. And so these are generic span exporters or generic log exporters, which means we can pull things in that the SDK provides as well, like this multi-span exporter, the standard out exporter so that it gets output into the log. And then also we have a Grafana OTel span exporter that I've configured down below to point to a Grafana instance that I have set up. And this is a really good way for me, locally developing, we'll see it as we run the app live. These spans will be output into the console.
Okay.
And then I'll also get export out to Grafana. And this multi-span exporter is just fanning out and doing the logic to fan out. It's just one of those building block pieces, which is good to see. And we'll do the same for logs. And so the same fan out logic is there, standard log exporter to output to the standard out, and then Grafana as well. And so those should all live now in this Grafana instance. Okay, so if we come back in to Grafana, and I'll refresh this page, we've got some data that has been exported. And so here we have the reflex measure trace, which comes from the reflex minigame. And then we also have this Simon game trace, which comes from Simon. And so reflex measure is very flat. It's just one span. The slowest was 715 milliseconds, and the fastest looks like 509 milliseconds. So I have to work on that a little bit, I think. But we'll see what practice can do. And then for the Simon game, we played a round of Simon. I'll leave the page. I'll open this up into Grafana's trace detail output, and you can see all of the rounds that we've gone through. Mini game is I implement the length of the game as the root span of a trace. And then for every round, as I'm responding, I measure how long I respond to the prompt. So the first round took me 2 seconds. The second round took me 3 seconds. And then the resource attributes there's a bunch of stuff because this is everything that describes the device, the time zone that you get, the service name, all of the standard resource attributes that you would normally find in OpenTelemetry. But then the span attributes are specific to this span, this round number 2. And so that's very useful to see. You can go back to Xcode. Let's start with Reflex. And so the Reflex minigame, Swift UI backing every view, there's this game model. So most of the logic for this minigame happens in this game model. We have a game state that walks through exactly where the user might be as they're playing the game. The initial touch, whether or not we're timing to show the prompt of the next logo icon, and then the user has to touch that next icon. Down here, I have a Reflex span that I build, and here's where I call into Embrace. So I'm grabbing the Embrace client. When we set up Embrace, what we do when we call setup and start, we set this singleton, the Embrace client. We also return it from the start method if you'd like. So back where we call setup and start, we could actually say let client equals if I wanted to keep an instance of this. But just for a quick shortcut, we chose to have this optional client. And the client is optional because if initialization fails for any reason, and really the only reason initialization would fail is if the device is out of disk space, then initialization has to fail. That's why the client is optional. If it's not, which it shouldn't be, we're going to build the span. So I'll set the start time just to when the user touches the item. I'm going to mark it as a key span. This is really just important for the Embrace dashboard. It's how we filter out a lot of the clutter that comes in. And it just sets an attribute on the span that we can then index and say, okay, these are the ones that are important to you. It's like favoriting something. And then we call start. And so the Reflex span gets started and the game is being played. And then we show the next icon. And when the next icon comes in, the user has to touch it. And so when they touch that next icon, we call this test submit button. And that's when we say, okay, the Reflex end is at this date. And so that's a quick and easy way to just add your own custom instrumentation. For us, it's this mini game, but you might have operation like you're parsing JSON or you're decoding an image and you want to measure something that's important to you in your application. That is what wrapping that operation with the span is really good for. And that's one way how to do it. The Simon game model is very similar. The only thing that I'll call out is we have 2 methods. We have a build game span, which is that overarching top level root span. And then for each round, we also build this round span. This round span, we're going to add some custom attributes. So we're going to add the round number to it for every round. And then the most important thing to link everything together is we're going to set the parent to the game span. You can think of a span as the duration of time. And then every span belongs to a trace. A trace is just a tree of spans. And so there's a parent-child hierarchy to make up a trace, and setting a parent is how you build that tree. But yeah, that's instrumentation in Embrace and OpenTelemetry. These are concepts that you can use if you're using the Embrace SDK or if you're using the OpenTelemetry Swift SDK, which is hopefully the same concepts.
Lots of super useful tools there for helping folks. I love how it's connected. You can connect it with your instance of Grafana and be able to actually see the data. And so much of performance monitoring, like understanding why it matters, but then being able to explain to the team in a more, I don't know, less backendy way. I don't know how to explain it, a more visual way for itself.
Yeah, so the last thing I would want to show you is the Embrace dashboard. I've mentioned it a couple of times, but you can export stuff to Grafana, as we have seen. Any OTLP collector you can. So it's not just Grafana. It's anybody that's set up to, and OTLP is the OpenTelemetry protocol. Many vendors are starting to take on that. And the beauty is this data can live right next to data that you already have from your backend services. If you're not pushing to Grafana, you can come and use the Embrace dashboard. Here I have that Simon game trace summary. Here are different instances of times that I've been playing the game. I can expand one of these instances to see that same stair-step waterfall of the Simon game span, and then all of the rounds below it flow out from there. Okay, Simon round 1, the span details here. The round number is 1, and round number 2. And then here, the final one, I failed. Simon always ends in an error. That's the worst and best part of it. But the last one should always be where I failed. And I can see that was round number 7, and my progress, I failed. I took 2 steps correctly, and then I failed on my 3rd one. And so that's what that attribute represents. But yeah, this is the Embrace dashboard. It's a very friendly way to digest a lot of this data. But, if you're in Grafana all day and you're very comfortable with Grafana, then that's why we also want to be able to export there, because it's really just what you like. It's complete preference.
I love that. So this dashboard looks beautiful, though. You can just click and open and get the more detail. That looks great.
Yeah. Thank you. I'm not the front-end engineer, so I can't take any credit for it, but they will appreciate the compliment.
This has been so informational, Austin. So if I'm completely geeking out and I really want to actually start contributing to this project, can you talk me a little bit through what the process looked like? I know we visited the repos. You showed us how to leave stars, and there is a contribution guide there. Definitely joining the Slack will probably be a good point to be a part of the community and see what it is. Is there one area where you're needing more contributions than others, or are you just open to all contributors at this point?
Yeah, just all feedback, really. We are a company, and so we're not expecting contributions per se. I think there's some hesitancy when there's a company backing it, but it's mostly just feedback. Is integrating with the SDK as simple as it can be? Are there features of Swift that we're not taking advantage of that we should be, or features of OpenTelemetry that we're not taking advantage of? There's all of that kind of goes into it. And even just, hey, there's a typo in your documentation. Reach out to us in Slack and just say, hey, I was confused by this bit. Can you explain it to me in a different way? And I love this stuff. I love talking about it. I love helping people solve the problems that they're dealing with. And what's really fun about just working in an SDK itself is I get to jump in and see this in so many different types of applications. And so it's really fun to see what other people are working on too, and just give them insight into, you're observing this operation, but maybe you're not accounting for if that operation gets canceled or it exits in a way that you wouldn't expect. And so we should end the span here and put a specific error code. And then that just enhances your observations and what in these dashboards. I'd be happy to have you.
And we do have a segment of the folks who join Open Source Fridays who are actually, they're also learning. So if you are a mobile developer and you're just starting the journey, understanding why this matters so much and telemetry and embracing these practices now is going to make your life a lot easier in the long run. So join the Slack too if you're a student, if you're starting to just build apps, and definitely get to know the company and get to know the SDK. And if there is a way that you can contribute, feedback will be great. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thanks again for having me. And it's been a blast, and happy Friday.
Happy Friday to you. Folks, before you leave, don't forget to go by the repo. Let's leave a star, please. Take a look, start building something, again, read the documentation, join the Slack if you see something that you think can be improved or a different way of doing things. Austin will be there talking to you. If you watch this recording after we publish it, and you have any other questions, feel free to follow Austin. That link is gonna take you directly to his LinkedIn. So send him a message there, connect or follow him. And yeah, we can wait to see what happens next with Embrace, and just to see all the community coming together and providing feedback. Very cool. Thank you so much. I'd like to ask one off-the-cuff question, because this is super niche, right? And obviously you're into this, observability telemetry, this is your jam, right? How does one become an expert on this? Was it just performance was your thing?
Yeah, I always had a knack for debugging. And just when I first learned how to program, I felt that I was very good at debugging and just stepping through a debugger. And I think this is just kind of a new frontier of that, because it's debugging, figuring out what's going on in an environment that you don't control. You can't step through it if it's out in the wild living on somebody's device, or even if it's in your server farm. So you have to watch it in the wild and see what it's doing, and then figure out, okay, why is it doing that? How could it get into that weird state? What's causing this crash? And a lot of times when you're doing that troubleshooting, you're walking back in the mobile space, you're seeing, okay, how did the user get into this state? Why did this button render off screen? Why is the user frustrated here and quitting the app? All of those are really good questions to ask yourself if you want to develop a high quality application, and having the right tools to answer those questions is really important. And so for me, it was just, I guess, a natural evolution of just day-to-day curiosity, wondering, and debugging.
Listen, you're out there saving phone screens one app at a time, saving the frustration of the crashes one app at a time. So thank you so much. That is super cool. I was thinking about it, and I think this might be the first time that we actually had a mobile-centric topic at Open Source Friday. So that's super exciting. And I love what Embrace is doing, and I love adopting the OpenTelemetry standards and doing all these things that are just gonna, at the end, like, benefit the industry as a whole. So that's fantastic. Thank you. Keep up the awesome work, Austin. I hope you come back next time. You guys have something fun coming out and release. When you add more mini games, come back and demo them, please. Thank you so much again, Austin, and thank you to the Embrace team for being open to coming to Open Source Friday and showing us what you're working on. This was really cool.
Thanks for having us again, Andrea. It's been a blast. All
right. We'll see you next time. For those of you who watch this, don't forget to do your homework. Go by Embrace, the repo. Please go by the embrace.io. I'm going to put it on the screen one more time. And follow Austin on LinkedIn. If you have questions about any portion of the presentation or the demo today, join the Slack, take it for a spin. And if you see ways in which either the documentation of the product itself can be improved, go ahead and open those issues and have those conversations with the team. Thank you for being here, and thank you for your support of open source. We'll see you next week for another Open Source Friday.